He was a small, slight young man, just about 5 feet 9 inches and 170, with deep, blue eyes and long, dark black hair that he wore down to the bottom of his shoulder blades and only hastily combed back over his head. His face was covered with dirt and grime when I first met him, but underneath the dirt, he had quite pale skin for a boy. He dressed in a very disheveled way, and I do mean that literally. His faded blue jeans had more tears in the knees and legs than I'd ever had in all my collected pairs of jeans, and his once white t-shirt, which hung loosely on his thin and lack of muscle frame, despite it being a size too small for his build, was nearly black with grime. His shoes were in poor condition, worn out and stiff, with the laces almost in tatters. That was my first impression of him. That and the rain that was still pouring down, soaking him completely. I was protected from the rain by my umbrella, but this poor, untidy-looking young man was soaked through. And between his unkempt appearance, the frail and hunched posture, and the damp, muddy clothing, the young man standing before me in the rain didn't make a good impression on me. But he did, however, appeal to my compassionate heart. "Please, mister," he wheezed, then coughed with a rasping, hoarse tone, hacking up phlegm. "I haven't eaten in 3 days. Oh, heavens, I thought to myself, what a mess this kid is. Where are his parents? He doesn't look like he's been homeless for long. Those shoes are last year's style." So what happened to him? He was still coughing, a deep, phlegmy, and hoarse cough, the kind you get when you come down with a bad cold or sinus condition. I winced at the sound of mucus being cleared, and he flushed a deep, cherry red, and turned away, spitting out the mucus onto the drenched pavement behind him. I winced again at the sight of the blood mixed in with the phlegm. I was just absolutely revolted. And that, I think, is what decided me. I'm usually a very neat person and can't help it if I have a poorer respect for disorganization than I should, so in a broad sense, everything about this young man before me shocked and repulsed me, to no end. But the sight of this sickly lad, hacking and struggling, moved my heart to such pity that it overcame my aversion to his appearance, and I began to see through the dirt and grime to the heart of the suffering young person within. "Come here," I ordered, turning around to head for my car. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw that, after a moment's hesitation, he had indeed followed me. But he had the look of a cornered animal, frightened and wary and wanting nothing more than to escape the danger, forever. He didn't trust me enough to come too close, which told me more than I think he intended, but he was hungry enough to follow me, at a cautious distance. But I wasn't in the mood to be more patient than I already was today. "Come on, kid," I barked at him gruffly, throwing open the passenger side door and waving him inside. "Let's get out of this rain before you get any more soaked than you already are." I brushed the few papers I had on the seat aside and tossed my briefcase behind the front seats, but when I looked up, he hadn't moved an inch. He was still standing behind me, just outside reach, caught between fear and hope. With a sigh, I forced myself to soften my expression and my voice and waved him to the other side of the car again. "Come on, kid. It's too wet to stay out here. You're already sick. If you stay out in the rain any longer, you'll catch cold enough to make you worse, and that's not good." He wavered, stepped closer, and then stopped again. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath to prevent myself from becoming frustrated at the hesitant young man, then tried my last tactic. "I'll give you all the food you can eat." He was inside the car in less than 10 seconds. On the way back to my house in Oak Park, Illinois, a well-to-do suburb of Chicago, I kept throwing sidelong glances at the kid seated beside me in my car. He'd managed to nod off within minutes of starting off, and instead of sprawling all over the seat and making the car interior messy with the dirt he was wearing, he curled up against the door and stayed still and quiet all the way home. He looked exhausted. Beat, totally drained, I thought to myself. His eyes were so bloodshot it made my skin crawl, but after I got over my initial revulsion, I looked beneath the dirty surface of the boy and saw through to the person beneath. He was thin, but not unhealthily so, just thin like a young man can be. That spoke of him having been well-fed, which meant, which had to mean that his homelessness was a recent experience. He had been moderately well-dressed before, which spoke of him being financially stable, meaning whatever caused his homelessness wasn't due to poverty. Then, when I paused at one of the toll booths on the Dan Ryan Expressway, I managed to look over and catch a glimpse of the skin beneath the torn, dirty cloth. What I saw shocked me, and it was so disturbing that I didn't even try to think again the entire way home. I just wrestled with the undeniable truth. He'd been hurt. Repeatedly, it looked like to me. "Oh Lord, kid," I thought, staring at the still, sleeping figure beside me. "What in the name of heaven happened to you? Who did this to you?" The boy's body shifted in his sleep, and another ugly, disturbing bruise appeared on his skin. "Heaven help me, kid," I thought as we turned down onto Lake Street, heading east toward the lake. "If I ever find out who did this to you, they'll regret it." Maybe I wasn't such a hard case after all. He ate for hours. 3 hours, to be precise. He didn't eat a lot, but he took his sweet time. Little bites here and there, when I was out of the room or turned away from him. Whenever I stopped fiddling with my internet connection long enough to look at him, he froze, staring straight down at the plate in front of him, and once or twice, I even thought I could see him trembling. My eyes would melt with sympathy for this poor, abused young boy, and then I'd turn my head away again, determined not to upset him further at that time. By the time he finished eating, it was near midnight, and I could already see the pale sliver of the moon shining outside the window of my townhouse. He pushed his plate away with a soft shove, then sighed in contentment. It moved my heart and softened the last of my resistance. He collapsed back in the chair. I waited another minute or so, taking my time to close the programs on my computer, because I was curious to see what he would do now that he was finished eating, and I was, to all appearances, ignoring him. Would he try to steal from me and run into the night? Would he try to hide in a corner and hope I didn't find him? What would this poor lad do? I found my answer when, at last, I turned around to face him. If there had been, at that point, any resistance left within me, it vanished when I saw him. Resting his poor, dirty face upon the hardwood of the table, the young man I'd found begging along the Chicago interstate was already asleep. Not asleep without fear, not so deeply that he wouldn't rouse if I moved even a little, but contentedly resting for what was probably the first time in the last few weeks. Without thinking, I rose from my seat in front of my computer screen and walked over to stand beside him. He shot straight up, alert and awake, his eyes wide with fear at my approach, but I saw the look in his eyes and made every effort not to reach out to the kid. I was sure it would only further terrify him if I tried to touch him. Instead, I pulled out a chair beside him, and as non-threateningly as I could, I sank down onto the seat. "Hey, kid." I started slowly, combing back my blonde locks of hair and tugging out my tie. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to touch you, and I'm not going to kick you out. I'm going to offer you a bed to sleep in, if you want it, and a deal to go along with it. Do you understand?" The boy's eyes calmed slowly as I spoke, softly and gently, to him, and he relaxed somewhat back into the chair. When I finished talking, he glanced around the room for a moment, as if he was waiting for someone else to harm him, but when no danger appeared, he looked back at me for a moment, just a moment, before he dropped his eyes again, and then, finally, for the first time since I'd met him beside the road, he spoke. He spoke softly, timidly, in a high, gentle voice that sounded like a young boy's would, before it broke. Was he that young? I took a quick glance at his figure and couldn't tell. He sure did look young. But underneath that dirt, was the slightness of that form the result of a slow puberty or no puberty yet at all? Just how old was my house guest? "What's the deal?" he asked me, cautious before agreeing to anything. "Just this," I told him, holding my hands wide open to show him I wasn't going to harm him, "that you tell me your full, right name, and your true age, and that tomorrow, when you've gotten up, had a bite to eat." I wrinkled my nose a bit at that point and showered. "We are going to have a talk." What kind of a talk?" he stammered. "You will tell me what you were doing beside that road tonight, for starters. Why you happened to be homeless, And who did this? I didn't touch him, just as I said I wouldn't, but my point at his shoulder was enough. He knew. To you. In return, I promised him, you may stay here for as long as you wish, and as long as it takes for me to locate your parents. No, he exploded, interrupting me and shocking me into silence with his fervent plea. No, please. Don't call my parents. I'm 18, mister. I promise I am. Here. He dug into dirty jean pockets frantically and yanked out what looked like a license card, handing it to me to look at. On that card, I could see that he was telling the truth. Beck Andrew Thomas, born February 18th, 1982. Height 5 feet 8.5 inches, weight 173 pounds. Restrictions none. The picture was a tad old and had probably come from getting his license at 16, but there was no doubt as to the kid's identity. After a moment's more consideration, I handed the card back to the kid. Okay, Beck, no parents. I promise. He relaxed measurably at that, and I silently began to add A and B in my head. That must be it. It was his parents. Either they mistreated him and kicked him out, and that's a federal offense, whether he's 18 or 8. Or he left on his own. Whatever happened, he's afraid of them. I smiled self-mockingly. Smooth move, genius. Okay, you can stay here for as long as it takes to get you set up on your own 2 feet. I hesitated for a moment, debating this whole situation with myself, and he could see me doing it. He blinked once and then reached out blindly for me. Please, mister, don't change your mind, he begged me. I promise to do your chores, I'll wash your dishes, I'll get a job. But please, don't kick me out to the streets again. I shook my head, smiling. No, don't worry about that. I was just wondering what to do with you. You see, I work at home as often as I do at the office, so I'll need to have you doing something while I'm at home, or we'll drive each other crazy. You mean you'll drive him crazy? I chided myself. Then I told myself to quiet down. But I can figure that out later. I rose from my chair then, got him in tow, and set off down the hallway toward one of the rooms I had continuously set up for whenever guests came over. It was fully furnished, and the bed was comfortable, if a bit small for someone my size. But for this short young man, it should be just perfect. I had him start getting ready for bed. I'd considered having him take a shower first, but after seeing what time it was and noting the heavy bags under the kid's eyes, I dropped that notion immediately and went to my own room. Coming back a few minutes later with some pants, shirts, and a towel. I laid them on the dresser beside him and put a $50 bill on the top of the stack for underwear and shoes. By the time I left the room, Beck was fast asleep. As I climbed into my own bed, in the master bedroom just downstairs, I felt pleased with myself. I'd done a good thing, taken in a poor young kid for the night, and, depending on the story he told me tomorrow, maybe a while longer, probably saved his life, and gotten him to trust me enough to get a good night's sleep. Maybe, with a bit of luck and a lot of patience, I could even befriend this boy and help him turn himself into a strong, capable college student, and help him make a happy life for himself in the future. The next morning, I rose shortly after dawn and stepped under the warm freshness of the shower without a thought in my mind as to the young man, I'd picked up alongside the road the night before. I'd dreamt of happy things, fine foods, good wines, and pleasant company, and by the time my alarm went off at 6:15, young Beck was completely out of my head. Rather comically, it turned out that Beck was also, at that moment, out of his bed. But we'll get to that later. For right now, let me take this lull in the story, created by the soothing backdrop of the shower, to explain who I am to you. My name is Keith Richard O'Brien, and I am, or at least, I was at this point and during this story, a 23-year-old graduate from Loyola University in Chicago with a bachelor's degree in creative writing and working on the second of a series of fictional novels depicting the lives and struggles of notable figures from history. I was currently writing a fictional adaptation of the story of Hannibal and reaping the benefits of my first book, the New York Times bestseller Socrates. The benefits of my first novel included, among their number, the salary figures necessary for a young writer to afford a small townhouse in Oak Park, a suburb of Chicago, my car, a hefty bank account, and a great deal of Oak Park businesses offering me their wares at discount prices or on special orders. Being a writer living in a highly literate community helps a great deal. In addition, I was a handsome young man, as normal men go. I had a lean and good-looking build, if vaguely on the healthy side of the line, a crop of short, well-groomed brown hair, and I always dressed in stylish shirts, khakis, or jeans. I was happy. I was fit, well-groomed, well-to-do, well-respected, well-situated, well in almost every way. In fact, the only area of my life in which I was registering any disappointment at all was my love life. In that regard, at least in my life, it was all too alike the old saying, lucky in cards, unlucky in love. In all my 23 years, I'd had fewer than 5 girlfriends and only one more than 2. But it wasn't that I hadn't had the offers. Those came and went in numbers too high for either hand alone or even both together, every year without fail. And even more than usual since the release of my book, Socrates. No, it wasn't willing women for which I had a lack. It was a lack of willingness on my part to accept the offers when presented. I was just too picky about the women I dated. I liked one woman's personality, another woman's smile, a third woman's shape where the previous 2 did nothing for me, and then there was a fourth who would have been just perfect, had she spoken any English. Well, I figured philosophically, say la vie. In fact, and this will finally bring us back to the story at hand, it was love, or rather the lack thereof, that had put me on the road just in time to discover Beck. I had just finished taking home yet another woman, this one a candy something or other, and I'm sorry, but how can any self-respecting guy date a woman whose name suggests the promise of treats in a long list of blind dates, when I had seen a waving, rain-soaked figure on the side of the road and pulled over to see what I could do to help the poor guy out. And this, of course, takes us back to the story at hand. Beck. Now, let's see, where were we? Oh, yes. As I was saying before I not so rudely interrupted myself, Beck was also awake already, and that I discovered as I stepped out of the bathroom and strode confidently down the hallway toward my room. Now, I know what you're thinking, I'm sure, but come on. And this is an appeal to the guys out there. How many of you bachelors or former bachelors have not walked naked down the hallways of your own private home, completely assured in the knowledge that no one was watching and not so dainty in your confidence? You know what I mean. Well, I had totally forgotten about Beck at this point, and so here I am, walking down the hallway of my townhouse, when I hear behind me a small gasp, and it all comes rushing back to me. Oh no, I thought. I must have blushed a trillion shades of red at that moment. I'm not sure now. All I clearly remember doing is hightailing it down the last few feet to my room, ducking hastily inside, closing the door behind me and locking it with the key. Then I sagged back against the wooden frame and did not move for a while. When at last, I felt the freedom to move about my own home again without, well, too much, anyway, embarrassment, I managed to amble my way down into the kitchenette of my small, cozy townhouse. Faint, pleasant aromas had been wafting up the stairs toward my room for some time now, and after I'd built the courage to peer beyond the frame of my door, or, more truthfully, after the hungry demon living in the cave I called my stomach got the better of me, I came downstairs to investigate. Hello, I called softly, still blushing a bit as I moved into the kitchen. Beck. Mr. Sir. There was a clattering of pans behind me, and then a crash of something gooey against the floor with a dull splish. And when I turned around to face the oven, behind me, I saw young Beck, decked out in a pair of the jeans and a shirt I'd left out for him the night before, cursing over a small pile of scrambled eggs that had managed to leap off the plate on the counter beside Beck, and suicided dove headfirst into the floor. I winced as I realized I must have startled Beck, but before I could bend down to help with the eggs on the floor, Beck had already scooped the mess into his hands and dumped it in the trash. He kept muttering on and on and on. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'm just so sorry." Suddenly, the heavy aroma of the kitchen caught up to me, and I must have blinked in surprise as I turned to my left, where an always-open door led to the dining room, and through which I could see the dining room table, and saw a hefty spread laid out before me. Eggs, some sunny side up, others scrambled, toast, lightly browned and buttered, and bacon, nice thick strips neither too oily nor too crisp, and a pitcher of orange juice, sitting beside a pair each of plates, forks, spoons, and glasses. "Beck," I said slowly in awe, as I moved out of the kitchen and into the dining room beyond, "did you make all of this?" Behind me, Beck, who had been apologizing nonstop for nearly a whole minute now, suddenly silenced, and I could hear his sock-clad feet shuffling across the tile floor of the kitchen as he followed me into the dining room. "Yeah," he said softly, in that high, soft voice of his that sounded so young. "I was cooking it while you were." He coughed slightly, and I could almost feel the blush returning to my cheeks. "Getting dressed. I hope you like it." It's all I know how to do to say thank you. I glanced quickly over my shoulder at Beck, who turned away from my keen eyes and blushed a deep shade of pink. "You can cook," I demanded imperiously. Beck winced a bit, and I regretted my tone, but at least this time he didn't flinch away from me. "Well, yeah," he mumbled, stepping past me to the table and filling one of the glass plates with a small helping of scrambled eggs. "I'm not very good, I know, but the place is so clean, there's nothing I can do to make it better. And I noticed you had the breakfast food waiting to be fixed, so..." He timidly extended the plate and a fork to me, and raised his deep, midnight black eyebrows in supplication toward me.